You were born inside a border you never drew, a line on a map, decided by people who died long before you were even born. But here's something that should genuinely disturb you. For 290,000 years, none of this existed. No countries, no borders, no flags, no governments telling you where you belonged. Just small groups of 20, maybe 50 people, moving wherever survival demanded, following food, following water, following the seasons. That was human life for almost the entire history of our species. So, how did we go from that to 8 billion people, locked inside 193 different countries, each one convinced that their line on the map actually means something, willing to defend it, willing to die for it? The answer isn't political, it's something far stranger. Buried in a single shift that happened roughly 12,000 years ago, when humans stopped moving and started staying in one place for the first time. And once you understand what that shift did to the human brain, you'll never look at a map the same way again. Let's begin. To understand where countries actually came from, you first need to understand something strange about your own brain. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in small, tight-knit groups. 20 people, maybe 50 on a good day. And there's a reason it stayed that small. The human brain can only comfortably keep track of a limited number of real relationships at once. Who to trust, who owes who's reliable in a crisis, and who isn't. Once a group grew past that number, something predictable happened. It split. Too many strangers, too much tension, too many people the brain simply couldn't keep track of anymore. So, for almost the entire history of our species, human society had a natural ceiling. Small groups, personal trust, everyone knowing everyone. There was no need for a country because there was no group large enough to require one. But then, roughly 12,000 years ago, something happened that had never happened before. People stopped moving. In certain fertile regions, small groups began settling in one place, permanently, instead of following food across the land. At first, it looked harmless, a few families staying near a reliable water source, a few more joining them. But something about staying in one place changed everything. Food could now be stored, which meant food could now be stolen. Land became worth protecting, not just passed through. And for the first time in human history, groups began growing past the number any single brain could personally manage, which created an entirely new problem. How do you get hundreds, then thousands of people, most of them complete strangers to each other, to cooperate, trust each other, and follow the same rules? The old system, built entirely on personal relationships, simply couldn't scale. Something new had to be invented. And the very first attempts at solving that problem left behind something archaeologists still find today. Long before anyone had invented farming, some of the earliest settled communities were already doing something remarkable. They were building massive, elaborate structures. Enormous stone monuments, carved and arranged with incredible effort, built by people who technically still lived as hunter-gatherers. Why would a group with no permanent crops, no stored surplus, put that much labor into something that served no obvious survival purpose? The answer may be the very first clue to how countries began. Shared belief. A shared ritual, a shared monument, a shared reason to gather gave complete strangers something personal relationships alone never could. A reason to trust someone they'd never met, simply because that person believed the same things they did. This was one of the earliest workarounds to the brain's natural limit. You didn't need to personally know someone to trust them if you both belonged to something bigger than yourselves. But shared belief alone still couldn't organize thousands of people long term. The real turning point came from something far more ordinary: grain. Once humans began farming certain crops, particularly wheat and barley, something changed. These crops ripened all at once, stood clearly visible above the ground, and could be measured, counted, and stored. Which meant, for the first time, someone could keep track of exactly how much food a person had. And where there's something to count, there's soon something to tax. Early settlements needed a way to record who owed what, who had contributed, and who hadn't. So people invented something extraordinary to solve it: writing. Some of the very first written records in human history weren't poetry, weren't stories. They were lists, grain amounts, debts, rations. Bureaucracy, in its earliest form, being built from scratch simply to manage more people than any single brain could track personally. Villages grew into towns. Towns grew into walled cities, built specifically to protect the stored grain from outsiders who wanted to take it. And once a settlement had walls, taxes, shared belief, and written records, it had almost everything a country would eventually need. Almost. Because these early cities still weren't quite countries. Not yet. They were missing one final ingredient. Something that wouldn't fully form for thousands of years. Cities and kingdoms existed for thousands of years before anything resembling a modern country ever appeared. Kings ruled, empires expanded and collapsed. Borders shifted constantly, often meaning almost nothing to the ordinary people living inside them. The idea that a border was fixed, permanent, and legally absolute simply didn't exist yet. That changed in a dramatic way roughly 400 years ago, when a series of devastating wars across Europe finally ended with something unprecedented: an agreement. Rulers agreed that each state had complete, exclusive authority within its own borders, and that no outside power had the right to interfere. For the first time in history, a line on a map wasn't just where an army happened to be standing. It was a legal boundary, recognized and respected by other governments. This idea slowly spread and hardened over centuries, but it still lacked something crucial: emotion. A legal border doesn't make a stranger feel connected to millions of other strangers they will never meet. That final piece came from an unexpected source: the printing press. Once books and newspapers could be mass-produced, people scattered across enormous distances could read the exact same words, in the exact same language, at roughly the same time. For the first time, someone in one town could feel a strange, personal connection to someone hundreds of miles away, someone they would never meet, simply because they shared a language, a story, a sense of belonging to the same imagined group. This is the strange trick your brain has been running ever since. You don't personally know most of your fellow citizens. You never will. But your brain, wired for small, personal tribes of 20 or 50 people, has been convinced to extend that same tribal loyalty to millions of complete strangers. A country, in the end, isn't really a place. It's a story, told so consistently for so long that entire populations began to believe it, defend it, and pass it down to their children as an unquestionable truth. Borders were drawn by people who are long gone. Wars were fought over lines that exist only because enough people agreed to believe in them. And yet, that shared belief was powerful enough to organize 8 billion people into cooperating, mostly peacefully, across nearly every corner of this planet. It started with 20 people around a fire who could never have imagined what that instinct would eventually become. If you enjoyed uncovering this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful things in human history were never physical at all. They were simply ideas, believed by enough people for long enough to become real. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.